Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Sunday Studies. I know it's been a while since I've done one of these, and I apologize. It's just with the upload schedule and everything, I've dedicated a lot of time to that. But this is something I really enjoy doing, and I wanted to get back on it. And it seems a lot of you do too, which really does mean a lot, and I appreciate it. So here I am. I will add that it's very cold out, and if I start to talk with a lisp or anything, my lips are numb. So I hope you appreciate the dedication to the outside scenery, or at least I hope someone does. So for those who may be new, because there's a lot of new guys, first of all, hello, hi. So for those that may not know, in real life, I am a Sunday school teacher. And some people found that out a while back, and they wanted to hear my take on various Bible stories. So I decided, as someone who may be a bit more knowledgeable about it than somebody else, it may be beneficial for me or whoever may be listening if I was to, every now and then on the channel, just present a basic Bible story and talk about it, what it may mean. See, there's the lisp already starting up. It's very cold out. But I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about it. There's a lot of people who may not be comfortable with church for whatever reason. There's a lot of people who just don't know a ton of details about it. So what this series is, it's not me Bible thumping you or smacking the pulpit or anything like that. It's just looking at a story from the Bible, talking about what it may mean, some of the more interesting ones in my opinion, and that's pretty much it. So if that's something that interests you, welcome. I hope you enjoyed. And if not, thank you very much for clicking on the video. It means a lot, and there will be normal videos on the regular schedule. As a matter of fact, I think there may be 2 by the end of the month. So hopefully that makes up for this not being an upload you're interested in. But thank you everyone for clicking on, and we're going to go ahead and get into it. But as always, thank you for watching. So I believe it was the second Sunday study I did, second or third. I'm pretty sure it's the second, but I talked about the story of David and Bathsheba. And to give a very brief rundown of that right here, David was the king over Israel, and there was a woman who he fell in love with by the name of Bathsheba. However, Bathsheba was married to one of David's chief generals. So in a move that no one could have known the intent behind besides David, David placed Bathsheba's husband at the front of one of the battles, hoping that he would die, and sure enough, he did. And as we saw in that story, God appointed a man to call out David and to call him out for the sin, essentially murder, that he had committed, and he paid the price for it. However, what we also saw in that story was God's mercy, because even though David had done such a terrible thing, God still took him back under his wing, and from that marriage with Bathsheba, they were blessed with the child known as Solomon, who went on to be the wisest man who ever lived. So I love the story of David. I love everything that happens in it. Not just that, obviously that being a very low point in his life, but the fact that the boy who slayed Goliath went on to become king over Israel is such a remarkable story that I decided for this, I wanted to look at another story in David's life. And as a matter of fact, if you read the Bible like front to back, like as one book, this is the story that takes place right after that story with Bathsheba. So this, for anyone who may be interested, is in 2 Samuel in chapter 13. And rather than giving you a whole explanation, the story will do that itself. So I'm just going to start in chapter 13, verse 1. And it says, "And it came to pass after this, that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her." So what's happening here is, and I talked about this in one of my previous videos, back then it was different, the concepts of marriage and children and all of that. If you were a king, you would have several wives so that you could have several sons to reign over different parts of the province, blah, blah, blah. So what's happened here is David has a son named Absalom, and Absalom's sister is named Tamar. He has another son by one of his other wives, whose name was Amnon. And as it says, Amnon loved Tamar. Now, obviously, this is not good. Amnon is Tamar's half-brother. However, and this, again, This is in 2 Samuel chapter 13. You can check it out yourself if you're interested. But what we see happen in that story is that Amnon becomes so vexed with Tamar, he hides the sin in his heart, and it keeps building up until eventually his friend convinces him to take what he wants, essentially. And in a very tragic case, he abuses his sister Tamar. So if you remember at the beginning of the story, I mentioned that Tamar had a brother by the name of Absalom, her full brother. And Absalom was one of David's most favorite sons. He was one of the sons that David looked up to the most, one of the sons he was the closest with. However, this thing that Amnon had done with Tamar was not public. He did it in secret, and no one knew about it. So there was no trial to be had. There was no evidence to bring forward. So Absalom decided to take his own vengeance later in the story. It says, this is still in 2 Samuel chapter 13. We are in verse 23. It says, and it came to pass after 2 full years, Absalom waited his time. It says that Absalom had sheep shearers in Baalhazor, which is beside Ephraim. And Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, behold now, thy servant hath sheep shearers. Let the king, I beseech thee, and his servants go with my servant. And the king said to Absalom, nay, my son, let us not all now go, lest we be chargeable unto thee. And he pressed him, howbeit he would not go, but blessed him. Then said Absalom, if not, I pray, the wind's catching the pages. If not, I pray thee, let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said unto him, why should he go with thee? Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read all the verses. Again, you can do it yourself if you're very interested. But what happens here is, my lips are going numb right now. My brain's going dead. There's also a dog barking in the distance. I don't know if you can hear it. But Absalom goes to David, and he has all this planned out. And he says, David, father, why don't you and all the brothers come with me to the mountains? I have sheep shears, which is a way back then of saying essentially like a house, a getaway house in the mountains. And he says, I have sheep shears out there. Let's all go and stay there in the mountains. And David says, no, 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 that's too much, lest we be chargeable unto thee. That's okay, but I give you my blessing. Go have a good time. And then Absalom says, okay, how about just Amnon come along with me? And David's curious because David doesn't know about this event that happened with Amnon and Tamar, or what Amnon did to Tamar. And he says, why do you want just Amnon to go? And eventually, over the course of the story, Absalom convinces David, yeah, just send Amnon. So Amnon, having absolutely no idea what's going on, remember, it had been 2 years since that event had happened. It says, now Absalom had commanded his servant, saying, mark ye now when Amnon's heart is merry with wine. And when I say unto you, smite Amnon, then kill him, fear not. Have not I commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. And the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and every man gat him upon his mule, and fled. And it came to pass, when they were in the way, that tidings came to David, saying, Absalom hath slain all the king's sons, and there is not one of them left. So, what's happened here is, the wind keeps blowing the pages on me. Just hold it. Maybe there's something over there I'm supposed to look at. But what's happened is Absalom tells all of his servants that whenever Amnon gets drunk, then we can all stab him and his guard will be let down. And sure enough, that's what they do. So all of Absalom's servants stab Amnon to death and they get away. And a messenger comes to David and says, Absalom has killed all of your sons. And David begins to freak out. And then a second messenger comes and says, no, he just killed Amnon. He didn't kill all of his brothers. And David is more relieved because it comes out at this point, Tamar says what had happened to her, that Amnon had abused her in that way. So it says at the end of this, it says, but Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ahumad, king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. See, Amnon was another one of David's sons, but whenever he figured out what Amnon had done, it says he was comforted with the fact that he was dead and wanted to go get his son Absalom. Now, here's the issue, though. This isn't a public record, right? And David was a very fair and just man. And David didn't want to go get Absalom and just say, come back to the palace, everything will be fine, because David wanted to be fair. See, how would it look if the king, the one who has the rules about if you kill someone, you'll be executed, if you attack somebody else, you'll be executed, and all that, if when it's public knowledge, one of his sons killed another one of his sons, if he was to just accept him back and be like, no, this was justified because of information only I know, people would be upset about it. So David's trying to be fair, but even then, he still misses his son. So there was a chief, or one of the advisors David had, who was a very close friend of Absalom, and his name was Joab. And it says at the start of chapter 14, it says, now Joab, son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. And Joab sent to Tekoa, and fetched thence a wise woman, and said unto her, I pray thee, feign thyself to be a mourner, and put on now mourning apparel. And anoint not thyself with oil, but be as a woman that had a long time mourned for the dead. And come to the king, and speak on this manner unto him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. So what's happened here is Joab's a smart guy, and he sees that David misses his son. And Joab also misses his friend Absalom. Now, again, like I mentioned, the issue with that is Absalom publicly murdered one of his brothers, another prince of Israel. So, Joab's plan is he gets a woman from a distant land, and he says, all right, this is a story I want you to go tell David. And I won't read it for the sake of time, but the story that she tells David is she says, I had 2 sons, and one of my sons did an evil act. So in recompense for that, my other son killed that son. And now everyone in my village wants to either kill or banish my one living son. Please stop them. And David says, of course, yeah, that makes total sense to me. I'll give him a pardon so that he can return home. To which the woman says, then why won't you do the same thing for Absalom? And at that point, David sees what has happened. He sees that Joab put this woman up to this. So he tells Joab to come out, and he tells Joab, go ahead, go get Absalom. It says, continuing off of that, before I get into analysis of it, it says, so Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house and saw not the king's face. So what's happened here is David's still trying to be fair. Now, I think we can all agree that what Absalom did comes from a place of understanding. If someone had done that to a family member that we loved, it is absolutely understandable why Absalom would want him dead. And even the king understands that, and I'm sure anyone who knew it would understand that. Again, the issue is that that's not exactly public knowledge. So, David is trying to be fair. He's trying to not punish his son for doing something understandable and perhaps even justified, but he also doesn't want to just turn over a new leaf and look like a hypocrite in front of his people. So, from Absalom's point of view at this point, he got off pretty good, right? Like, imagine, even if you are a prince, imagine if you murdered another prince with no public evidence of why you did it, and now you get to come back to the city and live in one of your houses, or essentially a palace. The only stipulation that David, there goes the voice crack, it is cold. The only stipulation that David puts up is that he can't look at my face. In other words, he can't come into the king's palace and be treated as a prince of the king, but he gets to live in his nice house in the city, and that will be our middle ground. And you know what? That's a pretty good deal for having murdered one of the princes in public. However, it's not enough for Absalom. In the next verse, we get a bit more description about Absalom. It says, but in all Israel, there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot, even to the crown of his head, there was no blemish on him. This wind keeps blowing the pages. And when he polled his head, for it was at every year's end that he polled it, because the hair was heavy on him, therefore he polled it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels after the king's weight. And unto Absalom there was born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of fair countenance. So Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, and saw not the king's face. So Absalom was a very beautiful man. It says none were so praised in all of Israel as Absalom was for his beauty. There wasn't a blemish on him. He was a very blessed man. Not only was he the king's son, he was a very beautiful prince. It says, in fact, he was so praised that when they pulled his hair, or in other words, that was a thing they used to do in tradition because they weren't supposed to cut it, at least the men of regal weren't, so they would tie it in these very tight bands and then cut off the excess. And it says that part that was cut off would be worth 200 shekels. That's how much everyone loved Absalom. He was worshipped as a prince, and that ended up getting to his head. But now he's come back. It says he spent 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing David. And he decides he doesn't like that. So it says in verse 29, therefore Absalom sent for Joab to have sent him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent again the second time, he would not come. So what's happened here is Joab, the servant who made the intermission to David to get Absalom back into Jerusalem in the first place, Absalom says, go get Joab so that I can tell him to tell David that I want to see him. But Joab knows that he's not supposed to, so Joab ignores him. And then he ignores him a second time. And it says, therefore he said unto his servants, this is Absalom, see, Joab's field is near mine, and he hath barley there. Go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and came to Absalom unto his house, and said unto him, wherefore have thy servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered Joab, behold, I sent unto thee, saying, come hither, that I may send thee to the king, to say, wherefore am I come from Geshur? It had been good for me to have been there still. Now therefore let me see the king's face, and if there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. So Joab came to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So Absalom, I bet there are a lot of crows in the tree right there. This is probably going to be annoying, oh well. So, or maybe that's the atmosphere, I don't know. So Absalom, a man who is very used to getting his way in several regards, now has, there are birds all around me, I'm scared. Joab won't come to him because he knows that Absalom's wanting to disobey what David had told Absalom to do. So Absalom tells his servants, go set Joab's field on fire. Maybe that'll get his attention. So the men go and set Joab's field on fire. So then Joab comes and says, okay, why did you set my field on fire? And what's interesting is Absalom uses a place of sympathy to get what he wants. He says to Joab, he says, well, I wish that I was still banished if I couldn't see my dad's face. And you know what? Let me see my dad, and if he thinks I'm lying or if there's any iniquity in me, then let him kill me right there. So Joab makes the deal, and it says whenever he goes to David, David kissed him, and that was a sign of pardon or grace from the king. So David essentially received him back. So this is our first sign that something's up with Absalom, right? Like I said at the beginning of the story, killing Amnon for what he did to his sister, understandable. We can all say that, yeah, I get why he did that. However, this is our first hint that it may be a little more than just that. Because now, whenever Joab, again, the guy who got him to come to Jerusalem in the first place, didn't listen to him right away, he set his stuff on fire. And then he pulls the empathy card. And he's like, oh, but it's just because I miss my dad so much. So I had to set all your stuff on fire. I hope you can understand. But now, Absalom's back where he began. He started the story as a chief son of the priests. And now, after killing another prince of the priests, I meant a chief prince of the king. Sorry. He started the story as a chief prince of the king. And now, after killing another prince, he's back as a chief prince of the king. However, that wasn't enough for him. See, Absalom had started out his life with many blessings. And then, after doing something, again, understandable, he came back to the same level of those blessings. But once he got on that incline, once he started realizing that he could keep getting more, it wasn't enough for him. And we see that continued on with chapter 15. It says, and it came to pass after this, that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man that had a controversy came to the king for judgment, then Absalom called unto him and said, of what city art thou? And he said, thy servant is of one of the tribes of Israel. And Absalom said unto him, see, thy matters are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee. Absalom said moreover, oh, that I were made judge in the land. that every man which hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. And it was so that when any man came nigh to him to do him obeisance, he put forth his hand and took him and kissed him. And on this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So what's happened here is Absalom gets back to the level he started at, right? And then he gets himself a bunch of chariots and a bunch of men. And he says, there's all these people in Israel that need to have their issues judged, or they need to have a court with the king, but there's no one to do it. So you know what? I think I'm going to be the one to do it. Now, on its own, this is a fine thing. If it's just somebody who is overhearing the matters of the people, then what's wrong with that? But it's his purpose in it, and that's where the issue comes in. See, that line, it says, and on this manner Absalom, so Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. People start to like him more. Imagine if you can't see the king, but then you talk to the king's son, and he's a very loving and understanding person. You're going to begin to find favor with him, and Absalom knows this. So much so that it says in verse 7, and it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed unto the Lord in Hebron. For thy servant vowed a vow, while I abode at Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord shall bring me again indeed to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. And the king said unto him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. See, again, Absalom is using emotions to get what he wants. Whenever Joab, after Absalom set his fields on fire, he told Joab, there's something that just moved behind me. Anyway, I guess this adds to the character of the video. I'm scared. He had told Joab that, well, I just set your fields on fire because I miss my dad so much. And that was his card to get through the door and get what he wants. And now he's telling David, hey, can you let me take all these chariots and stuff to this far off land? Oh, the reason is whenever I was banished from my home, I was so sad that I said, God, if you ever take me out of this, then I will go to this specific location on a map and I will worship you there. And again, that's a place of empathy. So David says, okay, all right, you can go with your men. But sure enough, Absalom has an ulterior motive. And it says, but Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. And Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy was strong, and the people increased continually with Absalom. So Absalom is now decided, not only am I going to go from being better than I was after all the blessings I received, not only am I the most beautiful man in all of Israel, not only am I the most favored among the people, I should be king too. And I should do that by killing my father and taking the throne. So he sends out spies everywhere, and it says that they each go to their own place, and they begin to say, oh, Absalom, the judge that everyone loves so much, he's going to be king now. We just have to go to Jerusalem and help him take over the palace. And that whole thing that, side note, I forgot to mention this little fact. 20 years had passed between the mention of him coming back to his father and him being a judge. So he was judging and doing this for 20 years. Just like with Amnon, where he took 2 years to kill him, Absalom knew how to bide his time. So he spent 20 years building up reputation with the people, enough that they're willing to turn on David just to get Absalom. Now, Absalom knows that it's God's will and that David is set to be king over Jerusalem. This has been destiny forever, and this has been God's will forever. And Absalom, make sure I get my name straight. Absalom knows that it's not his place to take the throne, but he decides, you know what? I'm so great, and I've done all these amazing things myself that I would be better suited for it. So he starts an entire conspiracy to take over the throne. And then sure enough, where's the next part? Yeah, I think there's a lot here in the next couple chapters. It's very interesting. For the sake of time, I won't go into it because it's not pertinent to the story necessarily. But it talks about David gets word that his son is coming with an army to take over the palace. So David and half of the city leave and run for the hills, while the other half of the city stays because they also want to have Absalom set over them as king. So David, along with half the city, half of his advisors, half the military, are now living in the woods in the middle of nowhere. It talks about them being in the wilderness, and there's several parts where people who also live in the woods come out and harass them. One really interesting part, if you know anything about the story of David and as a boy, the original king Saul became an evil man, and him and David had several fights with each other. So what happens at the end of that story is Saul tries to kill David, and Saul is killed for it. Not by David, but his own dumb actions led him to death. So while they're all, this is years and years later, while they're all hiding out in the wilderness, one of the sons of Saul come out and begins talking about, you were responsible for my dad's death, and this is what you get. And then the entire time they're here, David's being berated, but he never loses faith in God. One interesting thing that he does whenever they're vacating the city and leaving the palace because, you know, Absalom's bringing an army, the Ark of the Covenant is a really big deal to the children of Israel at this time. The reason being God sanctified it, and there's this big deal that that ark will always stay with the king and the people that God has appointed over them. So whenever they are fleeing the city, there's a part where the men are about to grab the ark to carry it with them into the wilderness, because the ark never leaves its people. And David said, leave it. If God wants me back here as king, we will be able to come back and, like, if we leave the ark here, God will find a way for us to come back and get it. That's the faith that David had throughout this entire thing. Meanwhile, and again, there's a lot of detail here to get into, but Absalom is absolutely destroying the palace. He is tearing off pieces of it. He sees the ark, and there's a line he has to the effect of, haha, look, we scared him so bad they forgot the ark, because he doesn't get what David's doing or his motive with anything. It talks about him changing stuff. It talks about him setting himself as Lord over everyone. Like, he doesn't understand the graciousness of being a king. He just likes the power and the people that look over him for it. So sure enough, there is this one part I want to mention because it's so cool. So one night they're having a talk. Absalom's now sitting in the palace. He's done everything. It says he took several of the wives of his father because he could. He took a bunch of the gold and all of that. So now he's kind of like bored with the whole, you know, revolution takeover thing. And he's come to the conclusion that there is no way that his father isn't going to come back for his throne, and that all the people with his father won't come back. So Absalom says, well, we've got to kill my dad. Even though he's not here, like any night he could show up and kill us. So we have to preemptively strike, and we got to kill my dad. To which there's this part where one of Absalom, this is Absalom talking about how to kill his dad. And one of his advisors says, and Hushai said to Absalom, the counsel that Ahithophel hath given is not good at this time. For said Hushai, thou knowest thy father and his men, that they be mighty men, and they be chafed in their minds as a bear robbed of her whelps in the field. And thy father is a man of war, and will not lodge with the people. Behold, he is hid now in some pit or in some other place, and it will come to pass, when some of them be overthrown at the first, that whosoever heareth it will say, there is a slaughter among the people that follow Absalom. And he also that is valiant, whose heart is as the heart of a lion, shall utterly melt. For all Israel knoweth that thy father is a mighty man, and they which be with him are valiant men. So imagine the reputation David has to have. That whenever, see what had just been said, it opened saying, Hushai said, don't listen to Ahithophel. What Ahithophel had said was, well, we can just go out at night and ambush them. I mean, they're all going to be in a valley. It's like, we've got a military. They're like living out in the wilderness. We can get them. But Hushai said, let's not forget who we're talking about. We're talking about the boy that slayed Goliath. We are talking about King David. And he tells Absalom, he says, your father is a very mighty man. And all of those people who went with him are very valiant men. They're going to be hiding in the pit. And he says, if you try to attack David, all of Israel will know there's a slaughter among the men of Absalom. Because he knows that if they get into this fight, that David's going to win. Imagine having that reputation, by the way, that even your enemies conspiring against you are like, now, we got to be careful here. This is mighty valiant people that we're talking about. So anyway, he conspires, and eventually Absalom comes to the conclusion that they have to have an all-out war, that they've got to bring all the troops out to the middle of the woods. I got to find where his dad's at, and they got to fight him. So what happened? Let me see. What verse do I want to start reading at again? Let's see. Okay, so Absalom's like, all right, yep, I will suit up. Yeah, I believe, I can't remember if it's mentioned here, but I believe he suits up in his father's armor, which again, another like defamation against his dad. He goes with all the chariots and he goes out to find David. Meanwhile, on David's side, it says, and David numbered the people that were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. See, David had a spy with Absalom who stayed behind in Jerusalem, and that spy ran through the hills and said, Absalom's on his way, they're coming to kill you. It says, so David numbered the people that were with him and set captains over thousands and captains over hundreds of them. And David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab. Joab, the guy who originally asked for Absalom to come back, is now one of the generals who has to fight against him. It says, and a third under the hand of Abishai, Joab's brother, and a third part under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. But the people answered, Thou shalt not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die will they care for us. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that they secure us out of the city. And the king said unto them, What seemeth you best I will do. And the king stood by the gate side, and all the people came out by hundreds and by thousands. See, David still has a ton of supporters. To the point that when David says, well, I'll lead the battle, they say, no. You are way more important to us. It says, one of you is 10,000 of us. If you die, David, this is all for nothing. So you stay here and we'll go fight the battle for you. So David says, fine. But it says, and the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, his three generals, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. All the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. Even after all of this, David pulls his captains to the side and says, if you can, spare my son. See, if anyone knew what mercy was, if anyone knew what forgiveness was, it was David. David, like I talked about in the story with Bathsheba, murdered a man to have his wife. Like, there are few more evil things someone can do. But sure enough, God took him back into the fold, and he still remained a blessed man. And now David, having grown wiser and older with age, even after everything Absalom's done, he told his generals, spare him if you can. It says, so the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was in the wood of Ephraim, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David. And there was there a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. For the battle was there scattered over the face of all the country, and the wood devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. They're fighting in such dense wood that more people died of natural causes, or like natural causes in the wood, than they actually died with the sword. It's a horrific battle. 20,000 people died. But if you remember, David stayed behind. Absalom's at the front of the charge. And also remember that other detail about Absalom, how he was so beautiful and his hair was polled into these great rolls? Well, it says in 2 Samuel 18, in verse 9, it says, and Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule. And the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak. And he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. Absalom is riding through the battle on a mule. The mule goes under a thicket, and his hair, that thick hair that he was blessed with, gets caught on a thicket of an oak, and he's stuck there. It says the mule runs out from under him, and he was caught between heaven and earth. It got stuck so much in his head that he's just hanging there by his hair, and he can't do anything about it. It says in verse 10, and a certain man saw it, and told Joab, and said, behold, I saw Absalom hanged in the oak. If you remember, Joab is through with Absalom's stuff at this point, by the way, because Joab did all this to bring Absalom back. Absalom set his fields on fire, and now he's trying to kill him. And Joab said unto the man that told him, behold, thou sawest him, and why didst thou not smite him there to the ground? I would not have given thee 10 shekels of silver and a girdle. And the man said unto Joab, Though I should receive 1,000 shekels of silver in mine hand, yet would I not put forth mine hand against a king's son. For in our hearing the king charged thee and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Beware that none touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I should have wrought falsehood against mine own life, for there is no matter hid from the king, and thou myself would have set thyself against me. Think of how, like, not just loyal, but how honorable these people are. He sees Absalom. This is just a foot soldier. He sees Absalom there in the oak, hanging. I'm sure it was a comical sight. And he runs back to the general Joab and says, Absalom's hanging over there in the trees. And Joab says, why didn't you kill that guy? And he says, even if you would have paid me 1,000 shekels of silver, I would not touch a son of David. Like, it shows you why these guys went with him into the middle of the woods. They really do believe in God and believe in David being the appointed king of God. However, Joab, who was Absalom's friend who's been betrayed at this point, does not have the same emotions. As a matter of fact, Joab is absolutely done with Absalom. It says, Then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom, while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. And Joab blew a trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing after Israel. Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom and cast him into a great pit in the wood, and laid a very great heap of stones upon him, and all Israel fled every one to his tent. So Joab, very poetically by the way, being the one who deals the killing blow to Absalom, he sees Absalom, he kills him, and they just bury him in the wood line. And then later on, David, who's still back waiting for the battle, it says that there's a lot of text here. I want to get to the part I want to highlight. Essentially, Joab sends a messenger to go and tell David. It says, And the king said unto Cushai being the messenger, Is the young man Absalom safe? See, when the messenger gets there, David doesn't ask, Is the war won? Did we win? Are they on our way to kill me? He just says, Is Absalom safe? And Cushai answered, The enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. In other words, we defeated everyone, and I mean everyone. And it says, And the king was much moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate, and wept as he went. Thus he said, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I would have died for thee. O Absalom, my son, my son. This is so heartbreaking. Think about it. Like, again, David knows forgiveness better than anybody else. Few people in the Bible know forgiveness like him. Maybe Paul, but still. So David comes to this point, and like, his son was trying to murder him with an entire army. He took his palace. He did everything that would have been worthy of it. But even then, in the end, his father still would have forgiven him. Now, would the other people have killed him? Probably. I mean, Joab wouldn't have been happy about it, to be sure. But David still loved his son. And I want you to think about this story from Absalom's point of view. He was born with everything, right? He was the most beautiful man. He was a prince of King David. There was nothing really in the world that he couldn't have. And then, again, he did something that's understandable and eventually got back to where he was. But it was the fact that he was able to gain everything that he felt that he should keep gaining and he should keep going. And it went from, I'm a king's son, to I should be judge over everyone. Then I should be king, and then I should murder my father, the one God appointed to be king, because I feel like I can do better. At the end of a lot of these Old Testament stories, whenever a king or some important figure dies, there is a verse or a chapter explaining their legacy. Like whenever David dies in the Bible, it's like an entire chapter of just like, and David had this son and this son and this son, and they went to this land and this land and this land. And it's pretty much talking about how great David is. When Saul dies, it talks about his sons and where each of them went. And it's kind of like the legacy of that character. You know what the legacy of Absalom is? Now, Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's dale. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name. And it is called unto this day Absalom's place. He's got a rock. He never had a legacy. He never had anything beyond him. See, even Saul, someone who became evil and turned against him, he had sons, he had people to carry out his name and his lineage, but Absalom was so caught up with himself, he couldn't see anything beyond that. But it's poetic that everyone else gets all this description about it. And what's Absalom's description? He set up a pillar, and he said, "This is my pillar," and that place is known as Absalom's place. Yep, literally, that's all it was. Absalom's place, just a pillar he set up because he tried to chase down all of his blessings and get them at once. Like the goose that laid the golden egg. He wasn't happy with it being doled out over time. He wanted everything at once, and it ended up killing all of his chances at the same time. And what's interesting, what I love about Old Testament stories like this, they're all, at least to my belief, they're all real. And they're all true stories, but each of them has such an important message to us in the modern age. And one of the reasons I want to bring this story to you, not only because I think it's cool, and I think it's such a wild story a lot of people look over, but also because as a message, don't let your blessings become your downfall. So many people, myself especially, have all these amazing blessings, but all that we can think about is what we don't have access to. I wish I had this, I wish I could do this. When we take for granted several of the privileges that we've been given. Now that doesn't mean that people can't be downtrodden and you can't want for more, of course not. But whenever it comes to us, and everyone knows themselves better than I ever could. But when it comes to you in your personal life, and for me too, this is me preaching to the mirror, to myself. There's no one here right now, it's just a camera, so I'm staring at my own reflection, so this still applies. But whenever you come to the point where you're asking yourself, well, I wish God would do this for me, or I wish I had this, or I wish that XYZ would happen, so often that I forget XYZ that's already happened, and everything that I have been blessed with, and how far I've come, that's too far. And I'm getting to the point where I'm getting just enough rope to hang myself. I think it's so poetic too that Absalom died because his hair was caught in the briars. Remember the thing that he was blessed with that was so beautiful and massive? They would pay 200 shekels to get the shavings of his hair. Well, I can only imagine that as Absalom went on through his life, that kept getting bigger and bigger, just like his head. It kept growing like his head did. Kept getting a big head about everything that happened to him. And that hair just kept growing and growing. And it grew enough, and he got boastful enough that God gave him just enough hair to hang him in the briars. So what I'm saying, and what the message, so to speak, to get through to you with this is be thankful for your hair, but don't let it get caught in the briars. So I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you all so much. I will continue doing more of these. A lot of people are curious, since there hadn't been one in a while, if I was done doing them. And I want to say publicly right now, and this is for you all to hold me accountability to me too, in whatever capacity, whatever comes in the future, I will not stop talking about this book. If I do stop talking about this book, something bad has happened, or I have been replaced, and you should be worried. It may be a while between episode stuff. Reason being, I've just been so blessed with you all getting me to this point that I have people to keep up with, like sponsors and the like, and other blessings that I can never imagine in any regard. But I'm thankful, and I'm thankful to you all for that. So, but yes, this will be coming in whatever capacity or whatever point. And there will be more in the future. It may not be, I'm not going to say I'll do one every month, because with doing ads and all that stuff, it gets a little hasty upload times and stuff like that. I kind of got to fit them in. But I will always fit them in. So, yes, that will continue. But thank you all so much for watching. If you stuck around this long, you all are fantastic. Like I said, a couple new videos coming up this week, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. But for now, that is all. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!